The envelope arrives on a Tuesday morning in February 1968, slipped under the door of a cramped apartment in Burbank. Inside $10,000 in cash, no note, no return address, just crisp $100 bills rubber-banded together, smelling faintly of cigarette smoke and expensive cologne. Linda Morrison doesn't understand. Her husband died 4 months ago in Keysan, and she's 3 weeks behind on rent, feeding 2 kids on food stamps. She picks up the envelope with shaking hands, counts the money twice, then locks herself in the bathroom and cries so hard she vomits. She would never learn who saved her, but the man who sent it would spend the rest of his life hiding from gratitude. She'll spend the next 40 years trying to find out who sent it. She never will. But in her corner booth at the Formosa Cafe that same night, Dean Martin orders his 3rd scotch and asks the bartender a question. "You know any good lawyers who keep their mouths shut?" The bartender, a former stuntman named Eddie, doesn't hesitate. "Depends what you need." Dean slides an index card across the bar. On it 3 names, 3 addresses, all military widows. These families. I need someone to make sure the money keeps coming. Monthly, anonymous. If anyone traces it back to me, we stop. Eddie pockets the card, slipping it beside a thick stack of identical ones, their edges worn, ink fading. He's done this before. 17 times before, actually, though Dean doesn't keep count. Keeping count would make it charity. This isn't charity. This is something else, something that sits in his chest like a stone he can't swallow. It wasn't a headline. It wasn't a scandal. It was smaller than that. A landlord who suddenly stopped accepting money. A bank that froze an account. A widow who got a call at midnight and heard breathing on the line. That's how the world punished gratitude. Quietly, efficiently. "Same as always?" Eddie asks. Dean nods, doesn't smile. People think he's always smiling, but that's the stage version. The man who stumbles through variety show sketches with a rocks glass in his hand, playing drunk but stone sober. That Dean Martin is a construction, a fortress built from cigarette smoke and timing. This Dean Martin, sitting in a dark booth at 11:30 at night, looks tired, looks like a man carrying something heavy. Eddie starts to leave, then stops. Why soldiers' families? Dean's jaw tightens, then quietly. "My kid's over there." He said it like it was a fact, but his fingers kept tapping the glass too fast, too hard, like he was trying to knock the fear out of himself. Dean Martin Jr., call sign Dino, is an Air National Guard pilot flying F-4 Phantoms in Southeast Asia. Dean reads his letters alone in his dressing room, between tapings, doesn't tell anyone about the way his hands shake when he opens the envelopes. But that's not the whole truth. That's not the stone in his chest. The stone goes back further. December 1943. Dean Crosetti, not yet Martin, not yet anything, is classified for punctured eardrum from too many backroom boxing matches in Steubenville, Ohio. The army doesn't want him. His friends ship out to North Africa, to Italy, to places they'll never come back from. And Dean stays behind, singing in nightclubs, watching the gold stars appear in windows up and down his street. There's a photograph he keeps in his wallet. Never shows anyone. 4 guys in front of Crosetti's barber shop, 1942. Arms around each other's shoulders, cigarettes dangling. Dean's on the far left. By 1945, he's the only one still breathing. He never talks about it, never mentions the guilt that sits in his throat like broken glass. But people notice things. Years later, after he's famous, people start putting pieces together. A cocktail waitress at the Sands mentions that Dean always overtips veterans. A stagehand at NBC remembers Dean stopping a taping because a grip's son died in Vietnam. Remembers Dean disappearing for an hour, coming back with red eyes. A nurse at Cedars-Sinai tells a story she's not supposed to tell. Late 1969, 3 in the morning, Dean Martin walks into the children's cancer ward, carrying a guitar. No cameras, no press, just him and a room full of dying kids and parents who haven't slept in weeks. He sits on the floor and sings "Everybody Loves Somebody," so softly, it's almost a whisper. One mother asks how he knew to come. Dean doesn't answer, just smiles that sad private smile and leaves before anyone can thank him. But here's what that mother doesn't know. Dean's been coming to that ward every month for 3 years. Different shifts, different nights, always alone. And the hospital has no record of these visits. No sign-in sheets, no logs, nothing. It's as if he's a ghost, moving through corridors of suffering, leaving behind only the memory of his voice. The pattern emerges slowly, across years, across cities, across lives that never intersect except in the shadow of Dean Martin's silence. There's a lounge singer in Reno, 1971, name of Tommy Garrett, who loses his voice to throat cancer, loses everything. The bills pile up, and Tommy's about to eat his gun when an unsigned check arrives. $60,000. The memo line says only keep singing. Eventually, a Vegas pit boss let something slip. Dean heard you were in trouble. When Tommy tries to send a thank you letter to Dean's management, it comes back unopened with a note: Mr. Martin doesn't accept mail of this nature. The return address wasn't a company. It was a law office in Burbank, and the ink stamp was fresh, like it had been used that morning. There's a stuntman named Joe Roth who breaks his back on a Western set in 1967. Paralyzed, no insurance. 3 kids. He's lying in a VA hospital when a doctor says, "Your surgery's been taken care of." Best spinal surgeon in the country flying in from Johns Hopkins. All expenses covered. 6 months later, when Joe's walking again, he receives a letter with a Las Vegas postmark. Inside, "Stay on your feet, kid." No signature, but Joe knows the phrase. It's what Dean Martin says at the end of every stage performance, a private joke with his crew. There's a woman in Palm Springs named Rita Alvarez whose son dies in a helicopter crash at Camp Pendleton, 1968. 22 years old, never saw combat, just gone. Rita's at the funeral when she notices him. Back row, sunglasses, dark suit, sitting alone. Later, looking at the guest book, she sees the signature, DM. 3 months later, her mortgage is paid off. When she presses the bank for answers, the manager whispers, "Lady, I don't know who your guardian angel is, but if I were you, I'd stop asking questions." Years later, when Rita's dying of emphysema in a hospice, a man visits her, tall, silver-haired, tired eyes behind sunglasses, and sits with her for an hour, holding her hand. When he leaves, she finds an envelope on the bedside table. Inside, a photograph, her son in his flight suit, smiling, on the back, in pen, "He mattered." Rita dies that night, holding that photograph, and whispers 2 letters. But why? Why does Dean Martin spend his fortune on strangers? Why the secrecy? Why the rule that the moment someone thanks him, the help stops? The answer is buried in a night in 1944 that Dean never spoke about. He's 26, singing at a dive bar in Cleveland, making $75 a week. There's a soldier at the bar, maybe 20, uniform pressed, shipping out to Europe in the morning. The kid's terrified. At the end of the night, Dean sits down next to him. "You scared?" The kid nods. "Me too," Dean says. "I don't want to die," the kid says, voice cracking. Dean puts a hand on his shoulder. "Then don't come back. Find me when you do. I'll buy you a real drink." "What if I can't?" Dean takes every dollar in his wallet, $43, everything he has, and slides it across the bar. "Give this to someone who needs it. Doesn't matter who. Just make sure it means something." "I can't take this." "You're not taking it. You're carrying it. There's a difference." The soldier deploys the next morning. Dean never sees him again. Never learns his name, never knows if he made it back. But that moment stays with Dean. That feeling of helplessness, of wanting to do something, anything, to hold back the dark. Years later, when he has money and fame and power, he does the only thing he knows how to do. He carries it forward. Every envelope, every check, every anonymous phone call, it's all an extension of that night, that soldier, that $43. He's still trying to buy that kid a drink. There's a man named Frank Capello who worked as Dean's driver from 1965 to 1974. Before he died, he told his daughter something he'd kept secret for 30 years. Late 1972, Frank picks Dean up at Burbank Airport. Dean looks like hell, unshaven, eyes red, hands shaking. They're driving down Ventura Boulevard when Dean says, "Pull over." Dean walks to a payphone, makes a call. 5 minutes later, "Take me to St. John's Hospital, pediatric wing." Dean disappears inside. Frank waits 3 hours. When Dean finally comes out, he's carrying a teddy bear and crying. Silent tears running down his face, steady like he's leaking grief. Later, Frank learns that a 6-year-old girl in the cancer ward had been asking to meet Dean Martin. She'd seen him on TV, loved his songs. That 6-year-old girl, Maggie. She died that afternoon, 4 hours after Dean left. Dean had been visiting her for 6 weeks under a fake name, wearing a baseball cap. On his last visit, he brought her a teddy bear and a record player with That's Amore. He played it for her, held her hand, stayed until she fell asleep. He never went back. The grief was too big. Frank's daughter asked why Dean did it. Frank said because she was dying alone, and Dean couldn't stand the idea that anyone should die alone. In 1973, a rumor circulates in Hollywood. Dean Martin has spent more than $10 million on anonymous gifts, funerals paid for, medical bills erased, families saved from eviction, all of it hidden, untraceable. A reporter from the Los Angeles Times named Michael Brennan decides to investigate. He spends 6 months following leads, tracking bank records, interviewing recipients. He gets close, dangerously close. He finds Eddie the bartender, finds the lawyers, finds the paper trail. He's 2 days away from publishing when his editor calls him into the office. "Kill the story." "What? Why?" The editor slides a folder across the desk. Inside, a letter from Dean Martin's legal team, but also something else, a list of names, families, widows, children, all the people Dean has helped, all the people who would be exposed if the story runs. And then the editor said something Brennan couldn't unhear. "This isn't a story, Michael. It's a system. They're saying if you publish, the help stops." All of it. Every family on this list loses their lifeline. Brennan stares at the list. 73 names. 73 families. He kills the story. Never writes another word about it. But he keeps the folder. And years later, after Dean dies, Brennan will open it again and weep, understanding finally what he'd almost destroyed. Not a celebrity's reputation, but a lifeline for people who had nothing else. The story dies, and Dean's secret stays safe. But people start watching Dean differently, trying to reconcile the man on stage with a ghost moving through hospital wards and funeral homes. Dean operates according to a code nobody understands. He helps people, but only if they don't know it's him. The moment someone knows, the magic breaks. The act becomes performance. And performance is the one thing he can't allow into this part of his life. A priest at a church in Culver City tells a story. One Sunday in 1970, a man approaches him, tall, silver-haired, sunglasses indoors, asks if the church needs anything. The priest mentions they need a new roof. 2 days later, a check arrives. $50,000. No name. 6 months later, the same man returns, asks if the church has a program for struggling families. The priest provides 10 names. Within a week, all 10 families receive anonymous checks. Not huge amounts, enough to cover rent, fix a car, pay a medical bill, enough to breathe. The priest starts receiving regular donations, $5,000 a month, like clockwork. It continues for 4 years, then suddenly stops in March 1987. The same month, Dean Martin's son died, when his F4 Phantom crashed into a mountain. Dean didn't leave his house for 6 months after that. When he emerged, something in him had broken. He looked smaller, hollowed out. But even then, in the depths of grief so profound it erased everything else, Dean kept giving. The envelopes kept arriving. The bills kept getting paid. The families kept being saved. Because stopping would mean admitting that the world had won. There's a researcher at USC named Robert Chen who's been documenting Dean Martin's secret philanthropy for 15 years. He's discovered that Dean gave away $30 to $40 million between 1960 and 1990, most of it untraceable. But Chen found something else. A pattern. Every person Dean helped had one thing in common. They were alone. Soldiers without families, widows without support, sick children whose parents had exhausted every resource, people who'd fallen through every crack. Dean wasn't helping the unlucky. He was helping the abandoned, the forgotten, the ones the world decided didn't matter. Once, in 1975, Dean was supposed to film a Christmas special at NBC. Instead, he disappeared for 3 days. The network panicked, threatened to sue. Chen tracked down what happened. A stagehand's daughter had been kidnapped, ransom demanded. Family couldn't pay. Dean paid it himself, hired investigators, got the girl back, never told anyone. When the stagehand tried to thank him, Dean looked at him like he'd been insulted, just walked away. Never spoke to him again. That's the rule. Don't thank him. Don't acknowledge it. Let the help exist in silence. Because Dean believed that the moment someone thanked him, he became real to them, became a person, not a symbol. And if he was a person, he could fail them, could die, and leave them alone. Better to stay invisible. Better to be a ghost that exists only in the margins of their lives. December 1995. Dean Martin is 78 years old, retired, living alone in Beverly Hills. His health is failing, his memory is going. One afternoon, a nurse finds him in the study, surrounded by boxes, old files, bank statements, letters, photographs. He's sorting through them, with shaking hands, crying softly. "I'm trying to remember who I helped," he says. "Why?" "Because I want to know if it mattered." They spend hours organizing decades of secrets. Slowly, a picture emerges: hundreds of families, thousands of lives, all centered on one man who refused to take credit. At day's end, Dean sits back, exhausted. I needed to see it, all of it. I needed to know it was real. It was real, the nurse says. "You helped a lot of people." Dean nods, but he looks lost, like a man who spent his life building something invisible and now can't prove it existed. That night he makes one final call to Eddie, now retired in Arizona. "I need you to do something for me. One last time." Dean gives him an address, a family in San Diego. Father dead, mother working 3 jobs, kids about to lose their house. Take care of them. Same as always. Anonymous. "Dean," Eddie says gently, "you've done enough." "I'll never have done enough," Dean says, and hangs up. That family gets an envelope 3 days later. Inside, $20,000 and a note. "You're not alone." They never learn that the man who saved them died 6 months later, on Christmas morning 1995, alone in his mansion, surrounded by ghosts. Dean Martin's funeral is small and private. Frank Sinatra speaks, voice breaking. Shirley MacLaine weeps. A few dozen people attend. But outside the church, something strange happens. Hundreds of people show up. People nobody recognizes. They stand in silence, holding flowers, holding photographs, holding envelopes. A reporter asks one woman why she's there. "He saved my life," she says. "How?" "I don't know, but he did." The woman, 73, plain clothes, tired eyes. They stand for hours, these strangers, these ghosts of Dean's other life. When the funeral ends, they leave their flowers and envelopes and disappear. Later, someone collects the envelopes. Inside, hundreds of thank you notes from people who never knew it was him, who only found out after he died. One letter stands out, from Linda Morrison, 73, the widow who received $10,000 in 1968. "I spent my whole life trying to find you. I wanted to thank you. You saved us. My children grew up healthy and strong because of you. I got to live a good life because of you. I'm sorry I never got to say it while you were alive, but I'm saying it now. Thank you. You mattered. We'll never forget you." Here's the truth. They don't tell you. Dean Martin didn't do this because he was a saint. He did it because he was terrified. Terrified that his luck was undeserved. Terrified that his fame was built on the graves of better men. Terrified that if he stopped giving, the universe would notice, would realize he was supposed to die in 1943 with his friends, would come to collect. He spent 50 years trying to pay off a debt that didn't exist, trying to earn a life he already had, trying to make up for a crime he never committed. And maybe that's the saddest part, that all this kindness, all these lives saved, none of it was really about love. It was about survival, about a scared kid from Ohio who never stopped feeling guilty for living while others died. But here's the thing. It doesn't matter. Intent doesn't change impact. The families he saved don't care why he did it. They just care that he did. There's a story, unconfirmed, probably apocryphal but true in the way myths are true. A week before Dean died, he had a visitor, a man in his 70s, wearing a veteran's cap, leaning on a cane. The man looked at Dean, then said, "Cleveland, 1944. You gave me $43 and told me to give it to someone who needed it." Dean stared, didn't speak. "I'm the soldier from the bar. I made it back." Dean's eyes filled with tears. He reached out, touched the man's shoulder, whispered, "I never thought I'd see you again. I gave that money to a kid in my unit, kid whose family was starving. He survived, became a teacher, had 3 kids, 7 grandkids, all because of $43. Dean couldn't speak. "I just wanted you to know," the soldier said, "that it mattered, that it kept going, that you saved more lives than you'll ever know." Dean pulled him into a hug, and for the first time in 50 years, the stone in his chest loosened. Not disappeared. It would never disappear. But it cracked just enough to let in a little light, a little air, a little proof that maybe, just maybe, he'd done something right. The man left. Dean went back inside, and a week later, he died. Dean Martin didn't save people because he was kind. He saved people because he was saved by luck, by timing, by the punctured eardrum that kept him out of the war. He spent his entire life trying to pass that salvation forward, trying to be for others what fate was for him. The invisible hand that reaches down at the last moment and pulls you back from the edge. He wasn't a hero. He was a man who couldn't stop remembering that he should have died with his friends in 1943, and who spent the rest of his life trying to make that survival mean something. And in the end it did. Not because he was famous, not because he was talented, but because he believed, with a faith deeper than religion, that every life matters, that every person deserves to be caught when they fall, that no one should die alone or forgotten or broke or afraid. He couldn't save everyone. He couldn't even save himself. But he saved enough. And somewhere, in San Diego, in Palm Springs, in Reno, in 1,000 small towns across America, there are families who exist because of him. Children who grew up, grandchildren who were born, lives that branched and bloomed across generations, all tracing back to a single moment of anonymous kindness from a man they never met. That's Dean Martin's legacy. Not the songs, not the movies, not the Rat Pack. It's the invisible web of lives he saved, the families he held together with envelopes of cash and unsigned checks and rules, like "Don't thank me," because he knew that the moment they thanked him, it became about him instead of them. And it was never supposed to be about him. It was supposed to be about them. The forgotten, the alone, the ones nobody else was going to help. He was their protector, their guardian, their ghost. And they never even knew his name.